Welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, Donald Trump is desperate to end the Iran war. The Iranians backing Bibi and Trump overseas. What do they really think? We speak to an Iranian American who was recently demonetized on Instagram. And finally, the big story here in the UK. The Mandelson Files have finally dropped, at least the first tranche of them. But what's inside those documents? That's what we all want to know. I'm Aaron Bastani, and tonight, once more, I'm joined by Kieran and Andrieu. Kieran, how are we?
What the audience doesn't realise, Aaron, is that you and I have barricaded the doors and we're now taking over NovaraLIVE 7 days a week, 24 hours a day to match the scale of the news at the moment. Tuesday is new Wednesday and so on.
We're working a seven-day week here in Novara Media. We've been talking about a 4-day week for a long time. We're going in the other direction. I'm just joking. But of course, the news never stops, and nor do we here at Novara Media. If you'd like to support our work, you can, of course, be a part of taking us to that next level. Be part of building a new media for different politics. Go to novaramedia.com/support. Yesterday we had a long show. That means overtime, more staff, more costs. Your support help us take these stories to a bigger audience in a way that, frankly, let's be honest, the legacy media almost always fails to do. Donald Trump has told Axios today that the war with Iran will end soon because there is, quote, practically nothing left to target. Axios report this was in a 5-minute phone call with quotes that included, little this and that, anytime I want it to end, it will end. Typical erudition from the Donald. But the Israelis appear to have other ideas. Axios quote the Israeli defense minister saying this, without any time limit, for as long as necessary until we achieve all the objectives and decisively win the campaign. That was Israel Katz. Given Israel's intention is the complete destruction of the Iranian state, somewhere between Yugoslavia and Syria, one assumes Israel Katz means this could last a little while longer. Of course, Trump's desperation to end this war continues to be driven by the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. We've talked about this strait a lot over the past 2 weeks, but just to remind you, the Strait of Hormuz is the only passage in terms of water and maritime trade between the Persian Gulf and the open sea, where 20% of the world's oil supply would, in normal times, be transported through. And the key part of Iran's response to America and Israel's bombing of its mainland has been to keep that strait closed. In other words, to detonate much of the global economy. In a statement from the Iranian military's Central Operational Command carried by state TV today, they reiterated that, quote, any vessel whose oil cargo or the vessel itself that belongs to the United States, the Zionist regime, Israel, or their hostile allies will be considered legitimate targets. And the method of enforcing that policy has been, once again, made very clear. In the last 24 hours, 3 more ships have been hit by unknown projectiles in the Strait of Hormuz. These stills show an oil tanker flagged to Thailand, which caught on fire after being hit. Its crew needed to be evacuated subsequently. Meanwhile, the US military has released footage which they say shows the destruction of 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels near the Strait of Hormuz, the southern coast of Iran. The footage came alongside a characteristically confused post from Donald Trump on his own social media platform, Truth Social. If Iran has put out any mines in the Hormuz Strait, and we have no reports of them doing so, we want them removed immediately. If for any reason mines were placed and they are not removed forthwith, the military consequences to Iran will be at a level never seen before. I mean, does he mean beyond Hiroshima and Nagasaki? I mean, that would be the implication. I doubt that's true, but who knows with this man. If, on the other hand, they remove what may have been placed, it will be a giant step in the right direction. Additionally, we are using the same technology and missile capabilities deployed against drug traffickers to permanently eliminate any boat or ship attempting to mine the Hormuz Strait. They will be dealt with quickly and violently. Beware, President Donald J. Trump. So the US has no reports of Iranian mines, or Iran laying mines rather. But if Iran has laid them and they don't remove them, the military consequences will be severe, worse than anything we've seen so far. But also, if they've laid them and then removed them, well, that's great. Also, we're bombing a bunch of ships anyway. I'm sure that's exactly the kind of far-sighted strategic thinking that will encourage seafarers to risk life and limb crossing the Strait of Hormuz. But it's also possible the whole mining story is something of a red herring, because mines would, one presumes, be relatively indiscriminate in their consequences. And Iran, of course, wants to keep some ships going through. Yesterday, the Wall Street Journal reported that Iran's control of the Strait of Hormuz means it has been able to export more oil now than before the war started. Quite extraordinary. The rest of the world is seeing virtually no oil get through. Iran is seeing more of it get through. They report this. As Gulf Arab oil producers from Saudi Arabia to Iraq cut production and scramble for new routes that bypass the strait, Iran is conducting business as usual. I mean, this is crazy. That's according to data from tanker tracking firm Kipler, throwing a financial lifeline to Tehran as it comes under blistering attack from the US and Israel. Since the war started on February 28th, so just under, 2 weeks ago, 7 tankers have loaded oil off the Iranian coast, according to Kipler. At least 2 of the most recent loadings are out of the Persian Gulf. Kipler said over the past 6 days, tankers have loaded a daily average of 2.1 million barrels of Iranian oil, higher than the 2 million barrels a day Iran exported in February. That's according, again, to Kipler. According to the Wall Street Journal, the ships crossing the Strait are part of the shadow fleet of old tankers which are used by Iran and Russia to evade sanctions, the majority of which, of course, ends up in China. The paper said their reporters heard a ship crossing the Strait blaring from a loudspeaker, quote, "We're a Chinese ship, we're coming through. We're friendly, I'm sure that'll work." So all in all, this doesn't sound like a huge strategic win for the Americans. On that topic, and in more confirmation that the US and Israel have conflicting war aims in Iran, Axios has reports on further discord between the two nations. The outlet reports that on Monday, the US asked Israel to halt strikes on Iranian energy infrastructure. Of course, we saw those incredible images out of Tehran. This is apparently the first time the Trump administration has reined in Israel since the two countries launched their joint operation against Iran 10 days ago. They write this. The Trump admin cited 3 reasons for its request, according to a source with knowledge of the matter. Such strikes harm the Iranian public, a large portion of which opposes the regime. Trump aims to cooperate with Iran's oil sector after the war, similar to the approach he's taken with Venezuela. Good luck. The strikes could trigger massive Iranian retaliatory attacks on energy infrastructure across the Gulf states. I mean, of course, much of this has already happened. The international response to the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz is also ramping up. Javier Blas is an energy expert at Bloomberg. This was his take early this morning. Inside the G7 and the G20, most countries are absolutely livid with the Trump administration's attack on Iran, but don't mistake their indignation with the desire to let Iran take the global economy hostage via oil. G7, G20, OECD nations will respond to Iran on oil and Hormuz. He's talking about basically the collective West, as the Russians like to say. That's their formulation. Of course, the question is, what precisely can those countries do that America hasn't already done? That response has today taken the form of an announcement from the International Energy Agency that its member states have agreed to the biggest release of strategic oil reserves in its 50-year history. In the coming weeks, 400 million barrels of oil will be released from those precious reserves. That's equivalent to what the world uses over the course of 4 days, or what in normal circumstances flows through the Strait of Hormuz in around 20 days. Now, remember, these are reserves. They're there for emergencies. And the fact that this is the biggest ever release of those reserves shows just how big a crisis Israel and Trump have created. Which means the White House is going into overdrive to justify why they started what many view as an utterly stupid war in the first place. Here's Trump's chief negotiator, Steve Witkoff, speaking to CNBC.
If they have children, think about what this world would look like if you didn't have Donald Trump as the president. Because in a year, if you had someone who didn't have the courage to do this action, you'd have 30 or 40 nuclear bombs. And what would the world look like there?
What would the world look like if we had a country which aimed in a capricious and bullying manner which undermined stability and safety around the world? I wonder, what would that world look like? Claims like that make Alistair Campbell seem like the godhead of reason and truth. And even outlets usually sympathetic to the American foreign policy establishment were deeply unimpressed. Here's Greg Karlstrom. He's The Economist's Middle East correspondent. There is no remotely plausible scenario in which Iran would have had 30 to 40 nuclear bombs a year from now. This isn't even the usual case of Witkoff not doing his homework and not understanding his brief. Here, he's just making shit up. This is very important on 2 levels, of course. Iran doesn't have the nuclear material, anything like that, to make 30 to 40 bombs, and it doesn't have the delivery mechanisms to take that kind of hit beyond the Eastern Mediterranean. So when people say, we could be hit by a nuke in this country, it doesn't have the material and it doesn't have the means. And remember, as we talked about yesterday, this is quite extraordinary, Kieran, as we talked about yesterday with Vali Nasr, the man who stopped the IRGC from building long-range ballistic missiles, who was it? Ayatollah Khamenei. He said, no, these are a defensive weapon. They are only permitted for use in our region. They're not an offensive technology. I don't want missiles capable of hitting Western Europe. How many people in this country know that? I would wager not even 1%. Of course, that's why Novara Media exists, isn't it? Kieran, it does feel, when you see Witkoff, when you see Trump's statements, etc., that the Americans are really scrambling now for some kind of, people say, off-ramp. I think it's a little bit bigger than that now, isn't it?
They're reading a script to a different film. When you see Witkoff, when you see all of them saying, this is all going fabulously, the war will be over soon, or it will be over at our discretion, it's a total farce and embarrassment. And look, this is just hastening American decline, Aaron. And that's not an abstract thing I'm saying. I'm not saying this is hastening American decline because opinion of America around the world is really low. Look, the opinion of the United States has been incredibly low since around the time of the war in Iraq. Right? It may have had a bounce under Obama because that's the way people work. They prefer the salesman to the actual substance. But it's back on the floor. But it's been on the floor for a long time, if you measure it by sentiment. So what do I mean by this is hastening American decline? I mean something much more tangible. This is going to precipitate in 5-10 years far more trade deals with China. This is going to precipitate in 5-10 years far more joint military exercises with China. And that sounds outlandish now, but that's going to happen. It will be the client states first, and then it will be the core allies after. And what you're going to see is what many people say is we're already in a multipolar age or a bipolar age with, two big states, China and the United States, with several regional powers or regional hegemons underneath. What this is going to do is hasten the age of unipolarity or two-tier polarity. China on top with several equally or roughly equally sized hegemons underneath. Just look at the region. The Abraham Accords, always disastrous for the Palestinians. The Abraham Accords lock in the occupation and ensure that Israel has a flow of trade with former enemies. Disastrous for the Palestinians, but considered a glimmering achievement of the Trump administration in his first term. Totally in tatters. Because why would any of those states, after this, trust the United States as a partner?
It's very well put. And I think, particularly if you think about the GCC countries, right, the likes of Bahrain, but particularly Qatar, the UAE, they have big money, even Saudi. You look at all this, even if you aren't saying to yourself, we need to be, pulling away from the US defense umbrella, because of course that's a huge statement. The Iranian position right now is actually, this is not a defense umbrella, it's an offense umbrella. It's not stopping anything, it's putting a mark on your back. There's some truth to that, of course, but equally, you're not going to just say to the Americans, please go away. The Americans, A, won't be very nice to you about that, but B, you do need some kind of mechanism for self-defense. And, what are the alternatives? Well, one is you keep America on side, but you also reach out to Beijing and Moscow. You want really good relations with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping because they can at least rein in the Iranians a little bit. It's not just the Iranians, but it's a really good example of that. And we've been talking about the rise of multipolarity on this show at Novara Media for years, and lots of people have just been poo-pooing it. Oh, yeah, American unipolarity and hegemony has never been stronger. I mean, there's just a solid argument here for people talking to absolutely anybody and everybody. And I think that's increasingly clear for much of the global south, developing world. The Europeans just don't seem to get it though, do they, Kieran?
Look, states get more violent as they decline. All history of empires shows that great powers, when they decline, become more violent. There's a Ponzi technical term for it in academia, the Thucydides trap. We don't need to go into that too much. But when one great power is rising, or several great powers are rising, one is in decline, as I think the United States clearly is, it becomes a lot more violent. And Europe doesn't seem to get it in regards to the global south, because Europe was never really the patron of the global south in the global economy. The United States was. And actually, it's worth drawing a comparison with the era of the Soviet Union. And actually, the stark contrast with now. The last time we had bipolarity, broadly speaking, and all of these are broad terms, obviously, if you drill down into the detail, there's nuance. But the last time we had bipolarity, which is, say, two enormous states, was the Cold War. And during the Cold War, states in the global south were, or at least their leaders, often dictators, were able to maximize the terms of return from the patron, either the Soviet Union or the United States. They were actually able to punch well above their weight and get quite a lot from one of those two benefactors. Now, and again, I think that the logic of that points in the direction of more states going to China.
Yeah. 12 days into the war on Iran, American hopes that the Islamic Republic would simply collapse have been proven false. And with oil prices spiking and regional allies attacked, the war looks to most right-thinking people like an epic self-own. But there are some true believers.
Take you! Take you! Take you! Take you!
And no, that wasn't a rally of the far right. That was the Iranian diaspora, or at least some of them, in Vancouver on Saturday, celebrating the war in Iran, which of course has included the killing of maybe even 1,500 plus civilians. Prominent protests in support of the war, yes, support of the war, have also taken place in cities like London and LA. And prominent Iranian American talking heads like Masih Alinejad have been huge backers of this war.
First of all, I have to say to Americans that please, if you're really anti-war, this is the warmonger regime in Iran. They are the root cause of the war. And I keep hearing some of the Americans, some of the politicians, they hesitate to support us. Democrats, this is not about you. This is not about politics. This is about ordinary people getting killed. More than 250 students have been killed in less than 24 hours by the Islamic Republic. More than 32,000 have been killed by the Islamic Republic less than 24 hours. So this is about ending a warmonger regime. I keep hearing Americans say that the Islamic Republic was not a threat to America. Really? No, really, are you serious? This is the regime that sent killers to kill President Trump. So basically, President Trump killed Ali Khamenei before he gets killed by Ali Khamenei.
This is an excursion here, but look, that's just not true. There's no basis in fact as to the Iranians trying to kill President Trump. And it wasn't a case of the Americans killing Khamenei before Khamenei would get to Trump. Khamenei actually was, by the standards of the Islamic Republic of Iran, more moderate. He's been replaced by somebody who's more hardline. You might have noticed Iran's military efforts have substantially escalated since he was killed. Again, as I spoke to Vali Nasser in yesterday's conversation, that became increasingly clear to me. When you remove that layer of RGC commanders, when you remove Khamenei, older people who are, of course, as you get older, you become more risk averse, they've been replaced by younger people with a point to prove, the complete opposite of what she's saying. Sadly, though, too much of the Western media platform people like that rather than actual scholars like Vali Nasser, who, he's just a lecturer in politics at Johns Hopkins University. What does he know? However, while it's pro-war Iranians who have received the most attention in the West, including, I must say, the BBC, it's unclear if they're even a majority, let alone an overwhelming one. New polling from the National Iranian American Council suggests that when asked whether they support the war, Iranian Americans are about evenly split. And on social media, anti-war Iranian Americans have been pushing back against the idea that the diaspora speaks with one voice.
Azadi Square was bombed. They're going to free Iran by bombing Freedom Square. As a child of West Tehran, the square looms heavy in my mind. I always associated seeing it with coming home. My grandfather, who would often drive me to and from the airport, called it the old name Shahyad Square Before the revolution, it was called King's Remembrance, and it was the king himself who built it to commemorate the 2500-year anniversary of Persian monarchy. It beautifully mixes old and new motifs, and my grandfather, being partial to Muhammad Reza Shah, continued to call it the old name when I was a child. It's so tragic to see yet another one of our cultural sites, our historic monuments, significant things to see in the city come under threat, along with the Tehran Bazaar, which I will post about as well, just holding through to their promise to target our cultural sites. It's so tragic to see this. I wish Reza Pahlavi would stop supporting this war, which is destroying the monuments, the foundations that his father laid down for our country. It's such a tragedy. Does watching this video make you think Iran is being freed? All I see is death and destruction. What an irony. To free us, they bombed Freedom Tower.
The imagery of that really was extraordinary. That was Mamad Ali Shahzadeh, Shahzadeh or at Shahzadeh on Instagram and X. He teaches Persian in New York, as well as being a highly visible voice on social media. For his critics, a little bit too visible. He joins me down the line live now. Mamad, good to see you.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Talk to me a little bit about your thinking right now, your views when it comes to the politics of the Iranian diaspora. I want you to talk about that with the graph we just showed, right, from NIAC, which basically shows a kind of even split in terms of Iranians in America and their view on this conflict. Why has the media not portrayed actually the level of polarization within the diaspora? If you just watch TV, you'd think that all Iranian Americans support what Israel and the US are doing right now.
Like all diasporas, the Iranians are split. They have a diversity of opinions, and this is natural. But unfortunately, if you are in a position where your country has a contentious or maybe good relationship with America, certain segments of the diaspora are highlighted. So for example, small detour, we have many Persian Gulf countries. They have diasporas in America, Bahraini activists, Saudi activists. Somehow we never hear from them in the news. And likewise, the flip side, so the anti-government people in dictatorial states we like are never heard from in the diaspora. The flip side is true for us. The people who support regime change war are put in the forefront. They're always interviewed. They're supposed to be representative of all of us. When polling shows, like you said, it's pretty evenly split. And it's important to note that poll was conducted in the run-up to the war, right? It's being released now, but it was done in a time when war was a theory, when war was an idea. Now that it's being shown what's happening and more anti-war voices are speaking out, thank you for lending me this platform. People are saying, whoa, we didn't support this. I'm getting messages from Iran. I'm seeing them on Twitter. We supported, precision strikes. We supported decapitation strikes. We supported 1 or 2 days, not 10 days, not oil raining in from the sky. So they always platform selectively the people who support the narrative of the empire, of war, of destruction. And the rare anti-war voice is always a cartoonish caricature of a real principled anti-war voice. So Piers Morgan, on your side of the pond, will have Ali Kalabon, the cartoonish pro-war person, and Mohammad Marandi, who is essentially a government spokesperson. I don't want to hate on anyone, but he represents kind of a cartoonish pro-government. He's just an agent of the state. They'll never have someone like me on. This is an open challenge to Piers. If you're serious about anti-war Iranian voices, bring a credible, humanist, left-leaning anti-war voice, not just some government lackey. But they'll never do that because they want to create this image that the entire Iranian diaspora supports the war. It's to gaslight you. So if you're an American and you say, you know what, I didn't know about Iran a month ago. I used to think it was Iran and Iraq, but now I know, and now I'm against the war. They will tell you, well, look at all these Iranians in America who support the war. And look at all these AI Iranians in Iran who support the war. How dare you white American, tell these brown people what's best for their country. I've seen, kind of like a woke pro-war take, if you can believe that. I saw someone say, how racist are you to override the collective will of a brown country as a white person, left-wing white racist. So they want to portray this image when it's not the case. I have been called by several old family friends, acquaintances, distant relatives in the past few days saying, hey, I love what you're doing. I'm so happy I saw your video. I didn't know you're online. You support me. I had someone call me who say I was part of the anti-government activities in Europe, but I withdrew recently because of the fascistic element that has been added. When Mahsa Amini happened in 2023, it was very left-leaning. It was a leftist movement. Now it's become fascist. The people in the Pahlavi movement are mostly hard right. So ethnic minorities, women, feminists, labor unionists, leftists, they're pulling their support back. But there is this idea that they should flood the zone. They're flooding the zone. They're saying, we're the majority. How dare you? Everyone who speaks up, they're doxing them. I'm documenting this all on the internet. They're doxing them. They're coming for their family. Me, death threats. Your address is posted. Now I'm getting hit with libel and defamation lawsuits, perhaps, demonetized. They're suffocating the anti-war voices. We haven't seen them represented anywhere, not on Piers Morgan, not on the media. They want to create this faux consensus for war when it does not exist. And if Nayek does another poll, I bet you it'll be 70-30 today instead of 50-50 before the war.
Yeah, I suspect that's true. Just anecdotally, some of the people I've spoken to on this side of the pond, British Iranians, there are people who, when there was the last World Cup on and Iran was playing, they were supporting the other team. These guys have now become, passionate nationalists. And I think that point about being 70-30, supporting the government of Iran or the people and nation of Iran, that's how they would see it. I think that's absolutely spot on. You said there that the sort of the Pahlavist movement, the monarchist movement, the people behind Reza Pahlavi are fascists. I want you to go into a little bit more detail with that. What do you mean? Because it's a word that's thrown around. When you say they're fascists, what precisely are you referring to?
Yeah. So it's important to know that maybe in the academy, there's a really particular definition of fascism and the state controls this or that thing or this or that event is happening. What I mean by that is a colloquial sense of far, far right, very far right movement. So on one hand, they talk about racial purity. Many of the people, not Reza Pahlavi himself, but it's important to note there's a bit of a smokescreen. Reza Pahlavi in Persian is different than Reza Pahlavi in English. In English, he's very liberal, very laïcité, fraternité, he's very French affectation. We just want to be like France. And in Persian, he's a bit more, we won't forgive, we won't forget. And then his supporters, his immediate circle of advisors are even more fringe. And then his base of supporters include nut jobs. So people who would say, like Jason Reza Georgiani, Iran was a white Aryan nation and it was invaded and polluted by yellow Asians and brown Semites. And he actually helped found the alt-right with Richard Spencer, and he's kind of a cheerleader for this camp. Or they will say things like, Arab Iranians are not real Iranians. Who are these Arabs? Whatever they don't like, they say it's Arab. So they would say the clerics are Arab and they're Indians, and we are high-minded Aryans. We have pure Aryan genetics. And I even tell them, why do you think they'll treat you like a Westerner? They'll say, well, don't you know we're white? We're Aryan, we're white. And their attitudes towards other political movements. So they claim they're a democratic movement, but what they say is, death to 3 polluters. Marg bar Sefasid, Mullah Chapi Mujahid. Mullahs, leftists, and the Mujahideen Khalq, which are another type of like Islamo-Marxist movement. But they have this idea that Marxist leftists, which are representative of a chunk of Iranian society, unlike America where I live, it doesn't have this kind of suffocated political realm. It's very normal to run into Marxist Iranians in bookstores, cafes, the universities. And, especially Kurds are known for being leftists as well. They're trying to suffocate. Also, Iran's ethnic diversity. So the Kurds, the Arabs, they're treated with, we'll accept you, but not really. So if you're a Kurd, but you're too passionate about your Kurdish identity, if you don't want to join with a Persian nationalist movement, then you're a traitor Kurd, you're a sellout. If you're Muslim, if you believe in Islam. So if you look past the English smokescreen, and if you look at what their advisors say in the Pahlavi movement, but especially the foot soldiers, it's just pure far right talking points. I think I've dedicated a lot of time recently to showing this to Western media on Twitter, because a lot of diasporas have played this game very astutely. We've seen this with the Israeli diaspora movement as well, where in English, it's, coexistence, peace, we're liberal. Don't you want to just live with us? You're crazy. We're just trying to be friends. And then in Hebrew, in Persian, in Spanish, whatever diaspora we're talking about, it's death to them. We're going to destroy our enemies. How dare you? There's no space left for you. So when you look in the Persian, and thankfully the auto-translate's becoming a thing now on many social media platforms, you see the type of rhetoric. I mean, just to give you a small anecdote, one guy said, many right-wingers in the West don't support the current war. It's important that we reach them. They say, why should white men die for Israel or for this brown country? You should let them know that one day Islam will take over Europe and they will come to Iran as political refugees. And the way that we use the West as a launching ground to destroy Islamic Iran or the mullahs, we'll use Iran as a launching pad to destroy the Muslims in Europe. True to form, the Pahlavi government actually for some time, they got rid of him eventually, hosted a runaway SS officer who fought in the SS in Nazi Germany, fled to Iran, and had an upstart Nazi party there for some time. So this isn't even foreign to the kind of the state ethos of the Pahlavists. And even Reza Pahlavi himself, sometimes his mask slips. He had an interview with Visegrad, I don't know how to say it, 24? Is that the way you say it? Maybe?
Yeah.
There's this
Visegrad,
Polish, I think, far right page, my understanding is. I don't follow the European kind of machination so closely. But if you watch his interview with them, he's just playing to the crowd. He's saying, yeah, the same way that Muslims destroyed Iran, they're going to destroy the West. I talked to my European friends, don't let the Muslims in. Look what happened when we let Muslims take control. So Reza Pahlavi, occasionally his mask slips. And let's not forget, he was told, you're going to have an interview with a man named Adolf from Germany. And he didn't end the interview. It was his advisors that after 10 minutes of him getting interviewed by Adolf from Germany, who's involved in the German army or something like that, finally his advisor stepped in, his English advisor. Your English have a better head on your shoulders than him. Said, okay, we're ending this interview, close the laptop. So when you scratch below the surface, it's like, whoa, what's going on here?
Yeah, that was a really remarkable video. He said, my grandfather was in Iran and he was a military officer. I mean, he's referring to, of course, the Nazi kind of Pahlavist connections during World War II. And it didn't dawn on Reza Pahlavi what was quite going on. Another talking point that you see from lots of people in the diaspora, I must say, particularly in the US and Canada, less so here. I think in the UK it's really interesting. The Iranians in Britain who are more keen to see regime change by whatever means necessary, they tend to be more recent arrivals. That's just my limited experience anecdotally the last 5, 10, 15 years. They've been radicalized. Maybe you can understand why to some extent by the effectiveness of economic sanctions and whatnot. The people who've been here longer actually have a bit more, savviness about things. By contrast, from what I see, Mamad, so you tell me if I'm wrong, I think because most of the sort of the military elites and the economic elites of pre-1979 Iran, those guys went to California, right? So those are the ideological diehards that want to go to bat for Reza Pahlavi. Right. So it's a little bit different to here in Europe. But what I see repeatedly is younger Iranian Americans say, look at Larijani, for instance. They say Larijani is not Iranian because he was born in Najaf, which is a very important Shia city in Iraq, in modern day Iraq. But of course, it's part of the broader Persianate world or the Shia world, whatever your sort of perspective on things is. Right. And many central figures in Persian history have been born outside the borders of what are present-day Iran. In fact, most of them, from Shah Abbas to most of the major poets, etc. And you try and explain this to these people. Lahore was the capital of the Ghaznavid Empire. Uzbekistan was Persianate, etc. They don't really get it. Do these people who are the most strident voices on social media for the return of Reza Pahlavi as the Shah, do they even understand the history of their own country? And if not, why not? This strident dogmatism combined with actually a relative lack of historical knowledge, there's a bit of incongruence there. Try and explain that to me. You're a smart guy.
You're too kind. It's unfortunate that for the last 100 years, Iranians have not been given a fair view of their history. So during the Pahlavi era, we had a lot of this Aryanism, it's called dislocative nationalism, this idea that Iran is actually an Indo-European country because we are Indo-European, but instead of heading to Europe with the other cousins, we stayed in the Middle East or dislocated from our true position. And the Shah actually said something to this effect. There's an interview of him. Reza Zia Ebrahimi has covered this quite recently very well. So this idea was fed to Iranians from Reza Shah up until the 1979 revolution. So for 80 years approximately, they were given this kind of cartoonish vision of Aryanism and anti-Islam and anti-Arab and all these things. And then in the last 50 years, the Islamic Republic has its own narrative of events that also emphasizes certain things and de-emphasizes other things. Iranians have never been given just a broad, neutral view of their history, unfortunately. So if you're a pro-government Iranian, many of them, believe it or not, are not aware that Iran was made Shia rather recently in its history. They don't understand it stretches back just a few centuries. And many anti-government Iranians are not aware of our broad history in places that they now view as racial inferiors. So if you use Pakistani as an insult under my comments, there are probably tens of thousands by now of comments of Afghan Pakistani, Afghan Pakistani. I was reached out to recently by someone with a very large platform. Famous guy, he's like a pro-war advocate, said, well, you're Afghan anyway, so why do you care? Stay out of our business. So if you tell them that Lahore in Pakistan was the center of the Ghaznavid Empire, where Ferdowsi was under the Ghaznavids when he wrote the Shahnameh, they don't want to hear that. Or that Afghans, were part of our civilization before they went their own way and became their own country. They have this very inward parochial view. So ironically, even though they purport to be Iranian nationalists, they want to sever Iran from its history, its ties, and make it a small, irrelevant, inward-facing country. So if we purge our Islamic connection to our neighbors and our history and just become Zoroastrian converts and just look inward and ignore and even hate and kind of have this contempt for our neighbors, then we won't have any influence in the region. We won't have any friends. We won't have any connections. Look at how connected we are. And this idea that, for example, Khomeini is an Indian because he had one Indian grandparent is like saying Winston Churchill is not, now I know you might not love him, but I actually don't know much about how he's viewed in England, but he is not actually a Brit. He's a New Yorker like me because his mother was raised in Brooklyn Heights, right? Or his grandmother. I think his mother or his grandmother was raised right here in New York City. So that would be like saying, well, Churchill is not an Englishman. He's not a Brit. He's a Yank. He's an American. See, we have his ancestry goes back to America. This is kind of this like cartoonish view. Now, of course, they would never say the same thing about their own dynasty because the Pahlavis, the family, are Turkic and Mazandarani. They're not Persian. His grandfather's native language was Turkish. He spoke Turkish with Ataturk in his one foreign state visit. So they're not even pure Persians, so to speak, either. And many of these people, their last names, as I pointed out, have Arab origins. One of these guys, his name is like Bedouin. Another person's name is Najafi. Another person's name is... the person who's engaged me or is going to engage me in a lawsuit now, her real last name means born of a high-ranking cleric. And she's like some anti kind of Islam activist. So when you scratch the surface, you find these people don't even know where they come from, who their parents and grandparents are. It's kind of cartoonish, really.
Yeah, I saw a great tweet by a lady. Her surname was Najafi of Najaf, which, as we've said, we've already mentioned, is in Iraq. Yeah. And she said, "I'm Persian, not Muslim." And it's like, your name is Najafi. You mentioned potentially being subject to a defamation suit. I want to talk about that very quickly. Also, you have 185,000 followers on Instagram. You were recently demonetized there, I believe. Talk to me about that as well.
Demonetized on Instagram. I can't go live on Instagram. I'm reach limited on Instagram. My posts were removed.
Wow.
On TikTok, I'm reach limited and my posts were removed, several, criticizing Reza Pahlavi. On YouTube, a video was removed and I was demonetized. Thankfully, YouTube is more fair than TikTok and Instagram. They actually went through the process and I was remonetized now. So over the course of a few days, I followed up and they're fair, to be fair to them. And on other platforms, I faced similar things. I've been banned from Patreon before. This is because what they do is they want to silence you, like I said. So they have these reporting mobs, basically. They have group chats. I've been sent screenshots by spies of these group chats where they send videos of people, or they even do it openly. They just post you on pages with hundreds of thousands of followers saying, with specific instructions, go report him, select for disinformation on this post and for terrorism support on this post. So a post where, like the Azadi Square video you showed, where I show Iranians getting bombed, they will report it as supporting terrorism and the video will get taken down. If you're just reporting on something, right? So they use all these tactics. And then even more vile, well-known member of the Iranian American community in New York gave me a death threat, which I consider credible because they have photos of them with guns all over their page. My parents' address and phone number were doxxed. My parents don't even really agree with half of the things I say, and they often encourage me to not even bother engaging with these people. My information has been doxxed. It's just, and then now I'm being hit with this kind of lawfare where they're sending you cease and desist letters and they're saying, we're going to sue you. And I talked about it and several anti-war voices reached out to me, 3 people saying I was given a similar cease and desist and I just desisted because I didn't want to have to go through this, onerous, arduous process of $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. And now what I've just found out is that in the UK, the standard of libel and slander is lower than in America. In America, you have to prove intent and malicious intent and financial damage. And if they're famous, it's hard to do. But in the UK, apparently the bar is much lower. I'm sure maybe you've dealt with this as a media company. But so I'm worried now I'm going to end up in the British court system because they said someone's father is a regime agent, which is just a fact, by the way, on the record.
But the good thing with libel law is if you don't have any resources, if you're not very wealthy, most of the ambulance chasing lawyers who do no win, no fee say, let's stay clear. If you're independently wealthy, Mamad, you might be in trouble. Before we let you go, before we let you go, where can people follow your work? How can they help you? How can they keep up with you? Because for me, and again, this is not Taruf, this is not me being, obsequious, Mamad. I think you're one of the most critical voices right now in the Iranian diaspora. How can people keep up with you and know what you're thinking on a daily basis?
Thank you. So the anti-war humanist fight, fighting the fight against the warmongers and the people who want to see death and destruction in the world, that's on my personal Twitter and Instagram. So the video you got was from my Instagram, Shahrzadeh. And I know it's hard to spell. Maybe you could put it in the bio or something. And I have a TikTok too. They're mirrors. And I would recommend people follow both because sometimes posts get deleted from one but not the other. And one's deprioritized and not the other. And I have a YouTube account where I'm posting long form videos because people are saying there's things I don't understand. Like this requires 30 minutes to explain. So now I have a YouTube as well that's active with the same name. The real work, the work that I hope to resume once all this madness is done and the warmongers go to the dustbin of history and true, freedom, justice-seeking people prevail, is this work. This is my book, The Flame of Love. It's a book of Rumi poems. I never pictured myself doing this. I always saw myself as a cultural ambassador. I'm in my cultural center where we have Rumi nights every Wednesday at 6:30 here in Manhattan. I would hope if you ever end up in New York, you would be our guest here. We gather, we have fun, we talk. Now it's more commiseration. But my real work is Persian poetics. That's my original platform. My personal platform, you mentioned, has 185,000 followers. I just started using it for this purpose. Before, all my posts were on Persian poetics, and it was just poetry. Rumi, it was just nice stuff. I was never engaged in wars. I was never engaged in libel lawsuit and doxing. It's unbelievable what these people have forced me to do by just advocating for this vicious, inexcusable war on civilians on a defenseless kind of state with no air force, with no navy. It's just, I hate that I'm even having to do this. I wish that our first interaction online would be just talking about Rumi and Hafez and things like that. It's so frustrating.
Shahrzadeh. I had one more question, which is where can people get the hat?
Oh, the hat. This is a Bukharian hat. Unfortunately, they're not really made anymore in the real way. It's handmade. So Bukharian Jews and Sufi Muslims both wear this. It's like Naqshbandi Sufis wear it. And just like this stuff and all this, all handmade. You can find them made with plastic now, unfortunately, in Central Asian stores, perhaps, like gift shops, or if you travel to Uzbekistan. But this is, I cherish this. It's like a 100-year-old antique, and it was actually originally a kippah. So it shows we're open to everyone. We love everyone. The Persianite civilization is inclusive of Jews, Armenians, Christians, Muslims. We're not a hateful people. We don't want war. And this is a sign of solidarity and that unity, that both Jews and Sufi Muslims wear this hat.
That's beautiful. I might go to Uzbekistan just to get one of those.
Great. I would love that.
At Shahrzadeh Mamad. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The first set of files related to the appointment of Peter Mandelson as Britain's ambassador to Washington has been released. The files, which are being made available after a vote in Parliament, show the official information Keir Starmer had access to when appointing Mandelson to the plum job. And on Mandelson's relationship to Epstein, this is what Starmer was told all the way back in 2024. A relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. You can see his memorandum-style document, and it effectively relays absolutely everything that was already in the public realm, from his relationship to Prince Andrieu, to that very famous JP Morgan report, which relayed, some pretty damning connections between Epstein and Mandelson. So that's what Starmer was told at the time. It doesn't really tell us anything we didn't already know, of course. The files also have the summaries of meetings from last year, which are a bit more interesting. These are fact-finding meetings hosted by one of Keir Starmer's advisors after emails were released from Bloomberg showing how close Epstein and Mandelson were. This is a meeting with Matthew Doyle, at that point the head of communications for 10 Downing Street, who's put in charge of vetting Mandelson. Summary of call: Lord Mandelson is a personal friend of Matthew Doyle, who was vetting him. So while he doesn't recall specific instances, he would certainly have seen him at social events around December 2024. Matthew Doyle said he would not have had a unilateral meeting with Lord Mandelson to discuss the appointment. Matthew Doyle said he did, however, have a number of conversations with Morgan McSweeney that were one-to-ones. Recalls a number of wider political meetings around the time, some more formal than others. Matthew Doyle recalls some back and forth with Morgan McSweeney, which resulted in 3 specific questions for Lord Mandelson to answer in respect of Jeffrey Epstein. Possibly some discussion of Global Council as well. That, of course, was his lobbying shop. It's now gone insolvent. Matthew Doyle recalls there were interactions with Elisa Terry and Jonathan Powell. That's the foreign policy supremo at 10 Downing Street with Starmer right now. Though not details. Matthew Doyle believes Jonathan Powell was particularly cautious about the appointment. Matthew Doyle does not recall any unique correspondence or a specific letter from Lord Mandelson to PM, as in Starmer, about the appointment. Now, if you recognise Matthew Doyle's name, I've said it enough times, it's probably because over Christmas it became big news that he campaigned for a friend after that person had been charged with child sex offences. They were subsequently found guilty of possessing images of a child as young as 10. So the fact he and Mandelson have enough in common to form a close friendship might not be that much of a surprise to viewers. The other fact-finding meeting was with Starmer's National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell. Jonathan Powell found the appointment process unusual of Lord Mandelson, weirdly rushed, noted Neen Pandit. Jonathan Powell doesn't recall any specific meetings on this that he was involved in, though there were a few conversations. Jonathan Powell raised concerns about the individual and reputation of Morgan McSweeney. McSweeney responded the issues had been addressed. What issues? There's a clear direction here, right? Morgan McSweeney has a lot to answer for, already very, very clear. In terms of PM engagement, Jonathan Powell believes the PM may have had a couple of political conversations around this, but Powell was not party. In respect of correspondence from LM, Lord Mandelson, to the PM, that's Starmer, Jonathan Powell didn't see anything himself. Powell had a vague feeling there was some incoming communication from Lord Mandelson to someone, but has low confidence in that or what it was. Jonathan Powell noted FCDO, PUS, sorry, these are civil service acronyms, was Philip Barton at the time, who also had reservations around the appointment. So this is very important. Jonathan Powell is one of the most senior people within the Starmer administration, the foreign policy supremo, the former chief of staff to Tony Blair, right? Very accomplished man. And the most senior civil servant who was also involved in this also had reservations. What's clear is that the vetting is being done by a close friend of Mandelson, and it seems it's being pushed through by Morgan McSweeney. Now, Kieran, I said after that first screenshot, it doesn't tell us anything new, but in a way it does, because, of course, Starmer has said he didn't know a lot of things. People will remember Starmer saying, I wasn't aware of this or that conversation, relationship with Lord Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein. Yep. People then said, like you and I on this show, but hold on, there was so much stuff like the JP Morgan report in the public realm. We now know the JP Morgan report was among the details actually disclosed to the PM before he made that decision. Yeah,
and I don't like to be proven right about terrible things, but we said it's implausible. I remember the phrase we used at the time. It's completely implausible. And that this only had 2 outcomes for Keir Starmer. Either he knew and he was willing to appoint the guy nonetheless, which is wicked, actually, given the nature of the allegations against him, or he didn't know, and in which case he is grotesquely incompetent for not knowing. And one of the most important things for a political leader is to have knowledge of every aspect of what's going on in their office. So we said, didn't we? It's completely implausible. It's been shown to be completely implausible by this. I think this is new information, really. It's new information. We suspected it were the case, but now it's confirmed that Keir Starmer must have known all of these details. There's nowhere for him to hide on this. I don't know if it will create a scandal. These dropped just after PMQ so that he couldn't face scrutiny on them, which is highly strategic and I would say very mendacious, dishonest. But this is, I don't see anywhere for him to hide now with this. It's in black and white. And the Morgan McSweeney stuff as well. Look, it's so clear. If anybody doesn't believe that simply what happened here was Keir Starmer knew he outsourced his brain to Morgan McSweeney. Morgan McSweeney, using his brain, said to him, we have to hire Peter Mandelson, and Keir Starmer obliged. If anybody doesn't believe that, I've got some magic beans to sell them.
Yeah, proper garden rake stuff. And the one big decision that Keir Starmer has made, where he's been proven correct, is, guess what? This war, Morgan McSweeney nowhere to be seen. There's something to that, isn't there? Something that is perhaps even more interesting in the release are the details of how Jeffrey Epstein came to meet Tony Blair in 10 Downing Street in 2002. We were already aware of this meeting, but not necessarily the details. This is an email from Mandelson to Jonathan Powell, who, as I've already said, at that time was Blair's chief of staff. Do you remember when Clinton saw TB, Tony Blair? He said he wanted to introduce his travelling friend Jeffrey Epstein to TB. This was frustrated, TB said at the time, in the office for reasons he says he was unclear about. I think TB would be interested in meeting Jeffrey. Now, this is Mandelson pushing this. Who's also a friend of mine because Jeffrey is an active scientific catalyst entrepreneur, as well as someone who has his finger on the pulse of many worldwide markets and currencies. He's young and vibrant. He's safe, whatever that means. And Clinton is now doing a lot of traveling with him. I think that is really, really important. I mentioned to TB that Jeffrey is in London next week, and he said he'd like to meet him. I've ascertained from Jeffrey that he is flexible. He could be here any time from Tuesday onwards to fit around the diary, but would obviously need to know how reasonably quickly as to reschedule accordingly. I mean, this is a really important point, right? You know, Mandelson was getting time for Epstein to speak to the PM with no real reason beyond he's got his finger on the pulse. I think it gives you a little bit of a glimpse into how the Blair Downing Street operation worked. This is the briefing note given to Blair on the day of his meeting with perhaps the most famous paedophile in the world, Jeffrey Epstein. We've highlighted an important bit here. The background on Epstein is that he was very rich. Okay, great. He's worth about a couple of $100 million at the time, maybe even a billionaire. $30 million home in New York, plus a 10,000-acre ranch in New Mexico. Close to the Duke of York. He seems to have met Prince Andrew through Robert Maxwell's daughter, Ghislaine, with whom he has an on-off relationship, visited Sandringham. Peter says that Epstein now travels with Clinton, and Clinton wants you to meet him. He thinks you would find a worthwhile conversation with him about A, science, and B, international economic and monetary trends. Kieran, this is bizarre. Basically, Mandelson is saying Blair should meet Epstein because Epstein's rich. I mean, that to me sums up New Labour, right? You get half an hour with the Prime Minister, the most important person in this country, who's meant to be on top of all the problems facing 68 million people today, 60 million plus people back then in the early 21st century. You get to meet him just because he's rich.
It's absolutely shocking. And when I shared something about this, that was on NovaraLIVE actually a few weeks ago, I got a lot of people saying, you must be pro-Trump. You're trying to kick up dirt and, change the conversation to good old Bill. No, absolutely not. All the victims deserve justice, whether they were abused by Democrats or Republicans or neither of the above. About New Labour, yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear that New Labour was a kind of, especially through Mandelson, I think, mainlined through the person of Peter Mandelson into the bloodstream of New Labour. It was a project built around a kind of worship of money, the cult of money. He famously said, of course, we're intensely relaxed about people getting fabulously wealthy or phenomenally wealthy. I forget the exact phrase. I think money was a big part of it. And those who know Tony Blair, and I don't think it's idle gossips, but certainly not in this context. Those who know Tony Blair say that he loves money. Doesn't surprise me. I think that money played a central role in the kind of New Labour aesthetic as much as anything else. And so it doesn't surprise me at all. But it was it's a deep rot, I think, that still dogs the Labour Party to this day.
Yeah. It's a millstone around its neck.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about how degenerate British politics has become the last 25 years on both sides, but I have to say, really, it does start with New Labour. Yes, of course, Thatcher was bad, Major was bad, but for very different reasons. The idea, and this is crazy, with the vetting of Mandelson as this country's ambassador to Washington, of course, Mandelson, very close friends with a paedophile. That was conducted by Matthew Doyle, a man who campaigned for a candidate who had been suspended from the Labour Party and was subsequently found to be a paedophile. You know, it starts to make somebody like Alex Jones seem like a sensible, thoughtful voice on politics. You know, it's absolutely outrageous, and it completely corrodes trust in the political process. Hey, you know, I want corroding trust, certainly in the Labour Party. They don't deserve it. But in the process, more generally, that's always a worry. Final comments?
Yeah. I think actually one key difference between New Labour and Thatcher's successive governments throughout the 1980s, is that Thatcher was obsessed with money, and she was obsessed with unleashing market forces to make a new plutocratic or oligarchic class. But it is quite true what our mutual foe, friend, I don't know what he is, frenemy, Peter Hitchens says, which is that the New Labour was the first government to become completely obsessed with celebrity and glamour.
Yeah.
So Thatcher, the money stuff is absolutely right, and that's when it really starts. And but what New Labour does is it combines that with this sense of celebrity and glamour and 24-hour television. And that's, of course, where Alistair Campbell comes in. That's where you have Noel Gallagher coming to Downing Street, Ross Kemp, who was a huge celebrity at the time, seems strange now, coming to Downing Street. So it's that kind of synthesis, it's that combination of Thatcherite worship of money with a quite unique and, up until that point, unprecedented obsession with image, celebrity, glamour, and all of that.
Ross Kempe. This has been a great show tonight. Thanks for joining me, Kieran.
Thank you, as ever, for having me, Aaron.
These are remarkable times. We had the Islamic Republic of Iran hitting multiple vessels in the Strait of Hormuz tonight. It's just become normal news. But if you want to stay up to date with all the developments, not just in this country, but around the world, you know what to do. Stick with us here at Novara Media. And if you want to support our work, go to novaramedia.com/support. Help us build a new media for different politics, because we platform Iranians who know what they're talking about rather than conspiratorial nut jobs like Omar Jalili. BBC Newsnight, have a word. My name's Aaron Bastani. You've been watching NovaraLIVE. We'll be back tomorrow. Good night.